Is there actually a formula for how to be happier? Well, today we're talking all about the topic of happiness and some simple daily habits that can make a radical difference in how happy you feel on a daily basis. My guest today is Dani J. She is an award-winning entrepreneur, keynote speaker, podcast host, and storyteller. One of my favorite things about her is she is as real as they come. And she's also just freaking hilarious. If you follow her on social media, you know that she uses her real life stories to engage with her audience, teach life lessons, and inspire others to rewrite their own stories. We're going to talk about her new program, The Happiness Diet, and how prioritizing your life can lead to more happiness. Also, I thought this was really interesting, why she thinks that a social media cleanse, as she calls it, is something that we could all benefit from. I know you're going to love this one, so let's dive in. Welcome back to the Powerhouse Women podcast. I have a total powerhouse. Surprise, surprise with me today. I mean, it's really fitting. And I was sharing before we turned on the mic, this is kind of our first time actually getting to talk other than bumping into one another at events. So we're just going to do a little get to know you and record it for everybody. So Dani, thanks for being here.
Yes, I'm so excited. I'm like, hey, if this is how I get to spend time with Lindsay, this is how we do it.
That's really one of the best reasons to have a podcast is getting to talk to people that you would love to just really get to know and also use it to create content. I'm realizing
it's so true. Yeah. You know what? I love live events because you meet so many people, but the problem sometimes with live events is because there are so many people, you don't get a chance to go deep with them. And so I've seen you at like 3 or 4 events now. And so I love that we get this chance because yeah, you do get to go deep and just have some one-on-one time.
Yeah, it's so true. And I was sharing with you, the event I most recently saw you at is our friend James Patrick's event, Fitposium here in Phoenix. And you talked about something that was, in my view of what I've seen from you, a little bit different. It was this topic all about happiness and a course you and your bestie have created. And I was sitting and listening to it, taking notes, thinking, man, okay, we've just got to share this topic on the podcast because I think in a conversation which we have about women pursuing their big ideas, pursuing their purpose, I know for me, there was a time, and there still are times when I catch myself doing things because I think they're going to bring me happiness. I think they're going to bring me joy versus coming from a place of happiness and creating from there. So I'm excited to dive in and talk a little bit more about this whole conversation, this whole topic of true happiness and joy and fulfillment. I think that all of those things really tie together. But before we do that, for people who don't know you and don't know how hilarious you are on social media and just in real life, I want to really give people a chance to get to know you and just a little bit of where you have come from that brought you to the place where you're creating what you're creating now. So do you just want to share like the brief version of this story that has led to you sitting on looks like a hotel room floor right now, and me sitting in my home in Arizona, us connecting. No, but just what has led up to this point in the journey for you?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was thinking, well, this is going to be video and this is real life. So I have been living out of a suitcase for almost 2 years. And so when people ask where I live, I'm like, basically I live in hotel room. So I am in my home for the week. Wherever I'm at, I'm just like, that's home for this time. But yeah, how did I end up living out of a suitcase? This is a great question. And thank you for that. I try to keep things light and funny. And if you followed me for any amount of time, you might find my sense of humor a little inappropriate sometimes. I don't know. I just kind of have that thing where I like to say things for shock value sometimes. My mom cannot stand it, but you know, it's just me.
Sorry, Mom.
So I actually, I know. So I actually came from a personal training background, and how I even got into training was a little crazy. I was an acrobat at SeaWorld, and I always kind of brush over that. And people were like, wait, what?
Hold on.
But that was this random thing, how I got it, not random, but I was a gymnast, got into SeaWorld acrobatics, and I actually ended up paralyzed. And it wasn't from performing. I actually got a bacterial infection from the water at SeaWorld. So I was unable to walk for almost a year. And at the time, I didn't have insurance. I couldn't get physical therapy. So I would have my mom drive me to the gym, and I still had a walker. Like, I was able to slightly move my right leg. So I had just enough movement where I didn't have to be in a wheelchair. And I would have her take me to 24-hour fitness, and I'd sit on the recumbent bikes and just push my legs around with my hands, just to try to keep my muscles from deteriorating. And the doctor, when I first ended up in the hospital, said, "You're never going to perform again. We're not sure if you'll be able to walk again, and you're lucky to be alive." So that was kind of where I was at. And I wasn't sure if I'd walk again, but I knew that if I wasn't moving my legs, I would lose more and more muscle. So started to do that. And while I was doing that, I was researching online. Of course, I figured, well, if I'm doing all this research, I might as well get certified. So I ended up getting a NASM personal training certification. Had no intention to use it because honestly, I didn't even know if I'd walk. But I got certified just because why not? I'm learning it, so might as well get the checkbox that I did. So actually, after a year, I could walk normally, and then in about 2 years, just because of what happened with my work, I ended up just going to look for a job at a gym. So I started personal training. And I think what happens if you've ever lost, if you've been injured or if you lost the ability to do something, all you can think about is doing that again. And so I remember just sitting in that hospital thinking, if I can ever walk again, then I'm never taking advantage of this. So I ran a marathon, and then I started doing fitness competitions because I was just like, holy cow, this body, like, I need to do all of the things because I'm able to do it again, right? Yeah. I didn't want to take advantage of it. So I was hardcore into the fitness world, fitness training, and I think I wanted to look the part as a trainer. And so I started getting this following online. I was in fitness magazines, and I was doing all these expos, and I was getting a lot of just press and publicity for in the fitness world. And I really, really loved it. And at the time, it was like when The Biggest Loser was coming around, and I wanted to be like the next Jillian Michaels. And I was really like fighting against obesity, and I wanted to help people have these like massive transformations. So I was doing that. And I say I had this brand identity crisis because I ended up going to Belize in 2013 to help an orphanage. And I just remember there was a day where there wasn't a lot of food. Like, we had to wait on the food, and the staff brought me a peanut butter sandwich, and it was literally like Wonder Bread and peanut butter. And I remember on one part of my brain was like, ew, I'm not going to eat these carbs. Like, I would never eat white bread at home. Yep. and then in the other part of my mind, I'm like, dude, this is the only thing you're going to get to eat today. And these kids are so hungry. Like, that's all they get. Right. And so I had this moment of realizing what a like kind of stuck up attitude I had. And at the same time, like, going, oh my gosh, this is like, we're pretty blessed to be able to just choose whether we're not going to eat white bread or not. Right. And so I went home, and I kind of was having this reverse culture shock. And then, like I said, a brand identity crisis. And I literally thought, if one more person messages me and asks me if they can eat carbs after 4 o'clock, I'm going to flip out. But that's what I had created. I had taught people how, like, I was doing a lot of meal plans and workouts and telling people what to eat and what to do. And I was like, you know what? We're so lucky we even get the opportunity to ask these questions.
Right.
And so I had a brand called the Sweaty Betties. It was really big, and I loved it. And it was all about making fitness fun. But I also felt like maybe there were bigger issues in the world. And so, not to knock fitness, and I know that those like people who are in the fitness industry do provide a service, but I felt suddenly I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I'm not going to make another meal plan. I don't feel right about telling people what to eat. I'm like, I think for the most part, I would say this. I started to attract a lot of clients with binge eating, and maybe it was just my demographic because I was looking for a bigger person who needed to lose like 80 plus pounds. But I was attracting these people who had binge eating issues. So they would come to me, and they would say things like, Danny, just tell me what to eat and I'll do it. Or just tell me what to do, like work out, and I'll do it. I just need to lose this amount of weight. And I would dig, and I would get into their life, and I was realizing like it wasn't about the food. It was they weren't having a conversation with the spouse. They weren't confronting a family member that they needed to. They didn't have boundaries in their lives. They weren't dealing with past trauma, and so they were stuffing it down by using food as like a drug. And so I just realized giving somebody a meal plan wasn't helping. I needed to deal with like deeper stuff. And so I, for about a year, just kind of hid in my brand. I had someone else kind of running my page, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to make money. All I know is I can't do this anymore. And the girl who was running my page, she had a baby, and she's like, Danny, you need to come back and like take your brand back. And I'm like, oh no. So I started to just go online and talk about what was on my heart, talk about, you know, the deeper issues, talk about money and debt and like how that stress can cause you to binge, and talk about how relationship issues and conversations that you're not having can cause health issues and hormonal issues. And I just remember a few times people were loving it, but every once in a while somebody would go, this is a fitness page, why are you talking about that? And so I just decided to basically drop the brand. Sometimes I regret that, but I just shifted everything to DannyJ.com. So I was like, if I'm me, then I can talk about whatever I want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so that was around 2015. I started to do the rebrand, and fast forward to now, what I really do is I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs or high achieving women who want to just rewrite their story, and who are wanting to maybe get to the next level, but for some reason they're being held back. So we have a lot of stories like, well, I didn't go to college, so I can never make a lot of money. Or, you know, somebody called me dumb when I was in high school, and so I can never write a book, even though that's what I want to do. And so figuring out what those stories are, identifying them, and then rewriting them, and then even owning them. So sometimes we have these stories that bring us shame. Like I got divorced about 2 years ago, and I was so ashamed to talk about that for a long time. And I really shifted that and like looked at it in a different way. And now I'm able to just own that story. And I think that this is really powerful too, because if you want to show up authentically, especially online, when there's anybody can judge you and tear you down, you really need to be able to own your stuff and own your stories, especially the shameful ones or the ones that you feel that there's shame around.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things you are really known for is being very authentic and sharing the hard stuff that you have gone through. So was that something that, did it start as a way to break free from the shame, or did you start with the mindset that I want to share this because it might help someone else, or was it a little bit of both?
So I can tell you exactly the very first time I shared something really hard, and it was out of simple frustration. So I was in that fitness world, the NPC competitive world, and I had been competing for 5-6 years. And after my last show, I gained 30 pounds in like 2 months. And I was still like doing 2-3 hours of cardio a day. I was eating hardly anything. And I was going, oh my gosh, what's happening to my body? I was going to doctors. I was getting tests done, could not figure it out. And I started to notice like there were pros in the industry and different people that this was happening to, and they were kind of just disappearing from social media. And I think just I got an email or I saw something that triggered me. And I was like, I can't have, like, nobody's talking about this. Why is nobody talking about this? I have to say something. And I remember I opened up my laptop, I put on the webcam, and I recorded a video. And I remember thinking, I said on the video, and I was super emotional, and it's still up today. It's got like 20,000 views, but I was just like, I'm frustrated. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm looking for solutions. And I'm just so frustrated. Nobody's talking about this. And I remember thinking that day, like, this could be the end of my career because I'm talking about something that nobody's talking about. I felt like the agency, like the NPC, was going to blacklist me. I thought as a trainer, I would be considered a fraud because here I was helping people lose weight. I was gaining weight. And I was just frustrated. And I guess I just wanted, I don't know, I wanted people to know and that they weren't alone. So I guess, yes, to your question, I did want to help people, but also it was just like, okay, if nobody else is doing it, then I guess it's me. And I think I've always been one of those people where if, you know, you're looking around a room or like there's an emergency, I'm kind of the person who runs up and tries to help, because I feel like, and I know there's been studies where there's like a bystander phenomenon where people, if there's an emergency, people will just stand around. And so I remember hearing that and thinking, okay, you just have to act. So I opened up the laptop, I did that video, and I remember slamming it shut. I published it on YouTube, went to my room, and I bawled for like an hour. And then I opened my computer back up, and I got hundreds of messages just saying like, oh my gosh, me too. This is happening. I had no idea that this happened to you too. Like, it was amazing. And that was the very first lesson to me of when you share something that feels maybe scary or vulnerable to you, it's something that connects you to people more than anything else. And so I made a pact with myself that year that if there was something that I didn't want to share, that I was scared to share, then I had to talk about it. And that turned into what's really kind of built my brand, and I think what built a lot of trust. It was between that, and then I had some stuff going on with my finances. My husband and I lost our home. He had to file bankruptcy. We moved to another state, and he got a job for $35,000 a year. And I was so ashamed of that because I wanted to portray like I was successful, and yet we had just lost everything. And I talked about that, and it was another thing that brought people to me and just felt more connected, because a lot of people have gone through hard things. And so social media isn't just to like act like we're above everybody, it's also to connect and to help. And I think ultimately, like what I do today and anytime on the podcast, Jill and I constantly just say, if this just only helps one person, then it's worth it. And so today, I think that's really like how I feel. If it just helps one person, then that's why I need to do it.
Yeah. And we're at this interesting time where I feel, at least this is what I'm noticing that I resonate with. It's not so much the perfect view of someone's life or even the perfectly curated feed anymore. That almost fades into the background. The things that make me stop and actually get my attention are things where someone is sharing from the heart, but oftentimes it's something that I'm like, man, I've been waiting for someone to talk about that, or I didn't realize I actually struggle with that too until this person said it. And I think there's a fine line between it, because obviously there's things that maybe aren't meant to be shared publicly, but I am always, and that's why I have always had such respect for you and really just enjoy following along your story, because I know I'm going to get the real deal, the good, the bad, the hilarious, when I am watching you online or when I'm seeing you at an event. So it's such a good example. And I think for someone like me who has struggled with some perfectionism, has struggled with, I think, just fear of putting things out there, that there's a lot of freedom just from owning all of the good and the bad, because it's ultimately, like you said, our struggles that unite us. It's not the highlight reel that actually makes a difference for anyone else.
Yeah. And I think when you're starting a business, and I know I fell into this trap too, is that you want to be seen as the expert and that you have all the answers. And I think sometimes when we share our struggles, we think that it takes our credibility away.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case. You look at somebody, and the thing is, we have to own that we are credible, right? If we have certificates, if we have degrees, and we have experience, then you are credible. You don't have to try to act like you have it all together all the time. I think there are things we shouldn't talk about. I think there is an overshare time, and I think it's important to know the timing of what you share and what you share if it's relevant to your audience. I always teach, when I teach entrepreneurs about sharing their story, I do a whole workshop on this, but it's, people only turn into the radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me. So if I'm sharing something, like I'm sharing about my husband's affair, why does my audience care? Am I just throwing him under the bus and being like, look at me, he's an asshole, and I am the victim? No, I waited over a year and a half to share that story, and I shared it from my point of view and the lessons I learned from it. No judgment on him. This is where I came out of it. This is what I felt, and these are the lessons I learned, and this is how it can help my audience. If I was I don't know, selling shoes or something like that, that's probably not a relevant story to my audience, so I'm not going to talk about it. But because I do talk about communication, and I do talk about confidence and self-esteem and how that affected me, and rewriting your story, what was my story when my husband left me? I'm a bad wife and I am a failure. So those are things that I personally had to rewrite myself. And so sharing that was in service to the audience. So I do think that it's important to know that we can share lessons, and it doesn't make us look weak or less credible. It actually makes you more relatable, and people will trust you more.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And just the distinction between how to know when it might be the appropriate time or place to share a specific story. That is so awesome. I want to talk a little bit more about this presentation you did, which was really based upon your online course, The Happiness Diet. What inspired you and Jill to create this course, first of all?
Yeah, so the happiness diet, I think ultimately, like going back to my clients who were binge eating and having other issues, it really, I think, comes down to we are all looking for something to connect with, to take away pain, to like, we just want to be happy. We're looking for the thing. So sometimes we're shooting for making 6 figures or 7 figures because we think that's going to make us happy, or we
Yeah.
want to lose 30 pounds because we think that's going to make us happy, or we want to get in a relationship and get the ring and have the baby because we think that's going to make us happy. And really, it's backwards. Like, you actually need to
Mhm.
find happiness first before you attract success, before you attract, like, before you lose the weight. I find that my clients who were not like, they were okay and like lazy with their bodies, but if they could love themselves at, this body weight, they can love themselves down and not have to like hurt themselves. So the happiness diet really came from, like, Jill's in the diet, or not diet industry, but she's in the fitness industry. I was in the fitness industry. People are always looking for that diet. And ultimately, I really think they're looking for the happiness diet, like not the next, paleo, keto, whatever it is. So that's kind of where we came up with that. And it came out of just a lot of personal development over the years. We both have done so much work and have had so many experiences that we were like, okay, we pretty much were like, how did I get through this hard thing? And how can I make it so someone else can follow the formula and also get through that hard thing and come out of it even better than before?
Oh, that's so good. And it really almost boils down to, I think about like the parallels to fitness. That's was my background too. People are always wanting to know, okay, just tell me what to eat, what workout to do. But what we put into our minds, what we consume with, just with our eyes, with our minds, is just as important as what we consume through our mouths. So I look at it as almost starting with the foundation of where where transformation in any sense actually starts. And I've never seen it put together in the way that you two have put it together. So I want to dig into a couple of the key areas that you cover in the course, because it really is, like I said, I've never seen something packaged together in the way that you two have done it. Just so beautifully. But I remember the exercise you did with us at this presentation that left the biggest impact was the one about setting priorities. I don't know a
Mm-hmm.
woman who's listening to this podcast. I would bet, and you can screenshot and share on social media if this is you. If you are listening to this and working out or driving and you have like a car full of kids, you're probably multitasking at the moment while you're listening to this if you're anything like me.
Yep.
So give us an amen, share it on social media, and tag both Danny and myself if you are now in the middle of this multitasking in some way. That's real life for most of us. But this conversation of priorities really helped me to it freed me up to say no a lot more, but to actually be present with the things that I was doing. So do you want to start even just by explaining, like, how do you define priorities and why
Yeah.
the heck are they so important when it comes to our happiness?
Yeah, I love starting with this because ultimately we hear a lot of things about boundaries or saying no, but I think it's hard to like really define what your boundaries are until you first know what your priorities are. And
So good.
I first learned this from a coach a couple years ago, and I remember sitting with him and he said, "Okay, what's your number one priority?" And so I literally was like, "Well, it's this and it's this and it's this." And he's like, "No, you can only have one." I'm like, "Well, I can't just choose one. Like, I need my money, and then my marriage is my priority, and then I need to like call my family." And I felt like I had so many things, and there only one thing to be number one. And it's interesting too, where I'll ask people what are their priorities, and you hear like the most common things is people will say family and God, or God and family. And I think that those are kind of canned answers because, and I don't say it's not true, but I think it's one of two things. I think people say it because they want it to be true, but when you look at their life, they don't see their kids, or they don't see their spouse, or they don't talk to their family, or they're not going to their church, or they're not practicing their spiritual practice. So I think they say it because they want it to be true, or they think that's the right answer, right? Like there's supposed to be some
Yeah.
correct answer. Because if you were like, well, money is my priority, you sound like you're greedy, right? Or if you say anything except one of those two things, somehow you sound like a bad person. And I think what we get mixed up, or what we get confused over, is that priorities can actually change, and they should change. So priorities are really, like, I did the definition of priority. It's just the condition of being regarded or treated as more important than others. So that's why sometimes it can feel bad if you say, this is more important than that. Because you don't want to say, well, my bills are more important than my kids. But if you're not paying for your bills, then your kids aren't going to eat. So maybe this month your bills are the most important thing to focus on. And it's really not about putting things in order of what you care about. It's what you focus on. What are you going to focus on this month? So I break things down into 6 categories. So the first is your financial, career, or money. So that's like your job or your bills, those kind of things. The second is family and home. So this could be your partner or your spouse or kids or even siblings and your parents, just however you define family for you. Then the third is physical health. So that's your eating, your training, however you're taking care of your body. And then the fourth is spiritual and ethical. So this could be your meditation, it could be volunteering, it could be studying whatever your scripture or religion is, meditation, prayer. And then there's social. We tend to neglect that a lot, like dates with friends, nights out, social activities, going to networking events, even phone calls. And then the last one is your mental educational. So what are you learning? What are you working on? Like your mind, reading, studying, maybe you have a course that you have to finish. So your mental educational. So we have these 6 things and not all 6 of them can be the most important. And it's hard because we want to be like, I want to be taking this course and I want to be training for this marathon and I want to be like the best partner and I want to be making all the money. And what I teach is that you prioritize for the month. And I actually do like monthly, weekly, and daily. But what I do is every month before the month begins, like it's almost November, so I'm probably going to actually do this week or this weekend, is I'm looking at the next month and I'm just asking myself, if I could just get one thing done by the end of the month, what would that be? Because what happens is if we don't prioritize, other things get bombarded, like things come in, like let's say you wanted to run a race and you're like, okay, I need to train, except somebody from school is like, hey, can you pick up my kids with your kids? And you're like, sure. And that cuts into your training time. And pretty soon you start getting resentful. You start getting angry. You're like, everybody's kind of taking away the time that you wanted to do your thing. And what happens is a year later, like you look back on your, goals for the year, your New Year's resolutions, and you didn't get any of them done because you kind of forgot about them and you didn't put them like front and center and you weren't able to say no. And suddenly now you're angry at everyone else because you didn't like really prioritize what you wanted. So I literally do this at the beginning of each month. I prioritize 1 through 6 and just the one thing for the month that's the most important. So I did the whole example of my month at Fitposium, which this month, and I can just go through it and tell you what I did, is, I've been traveling a bunch and it kind of wreaks havoc on your body if you don't get a lot of rest. So my priority for just this month, just October, was my physical health. And I wanted to get a little more consistent with workouts. And then I also put only drink alcohol 3 days or less because I've been doing so much socializing and going to events and like drinking. And I'm going, okay, I need to cut that back. And so what you do is you prioritize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you look at just the thing that just, if by the end of the month, you could just focus on this one thing. And then for each category, you're going to make 1 to 2 goals, and they're going to be very small goals. So maybe for your family home, maybe your goal is to go on 1 date night a month because you have not had any date nights with your partner or your spouse. And if you could just do 1 date night this month, it would be great. Sometimes people go, well, who cares? It's 1, it's not a big deal. But if you prioritize that, make sure it happens. Think about what your relationship's going to look like in 5 years. If you just do 1 date night a month, what is your relationship going to look like in 5 years?
Oh, so good.
Versus if you don't do it at all because you keep forgetting and you're like, oh, I'll do it, and you just never do.
Yeah.
And now you've had no date nights, you've had no time with your spouse. Now you're fighting. Now you're on the verge of divorce, or you're just not connecting. Now you're living with a roommate because you didn't make that a priority. So it's the small things. We always think that success and all the magic happens with the big things, but it is literally just the small things over time adding up. So my example for my month was just 3 days of workouts and drink alcohol 3 days or less. I didn't say I'm going to work out 6 days a week and cut alcohol for good because that wasn't realistic for me. Yeah. And if I could just get 3, I just realized this, I would love to work out 4, 5, 6 days. But the minimum was if I just did 3 a week for the whole month, that would be better than what I've got going on right now. And I could be okay with that. I'm not going to be thrilled, but I would be like, cool. And if I did only 3 days for the rest of the year, I'm going to be in a lot better shape than had I not prioritized it and I only ended up getting 1 or 2, you know? So you just go through this. So financial career, you're figuring out one small goal for the month. So it might be get 2 new customers, or it might be, you know, get $500 or sell something to make an extra $500, or maybe you have a network marketing company and so you have like a money goal. So sometimes it's money goals, sometimes it's amount of customers. So you get to really decide what that looks like. And the other point of priorities I want to make is that sometimes whatever number 6 is on the list, it doesn't mean it's the least important, but sometimes those things are so automated that they're just not on top of the list. So what I mean by that is when I'm living in a place normally, going to the gym is just, that's habit for me. It's not a big deal. So a lot of times my physical health in my order of priorities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's number 6, not because it's not important, but it's just pretty automated. And it's not something I really need to work on as much to focus on. Right now, I got to focus on it because I'm really needing to get my health back in shape. So a lot of times, if family is last, it's not because your family is not important, but maybe you guys have a good rhythm. Like you always have dinners together and you always, you know, take time in the morning to spend, you know, like connect. And maybe your family stuff is like really, really good. So it's at the bottom. And like I said, it doesn't mean it's not important. It's just, you got a good rhythm. And the other reason why this is important to prioritize is because life happens and stuff comes up and we have no control over something. So maybe, you know, you lost a job. And so your financial career needs to be number 1, not your family right now, because you've got to find a new job or you have to get money coming in. Or somebody ends up in the hospital. And so your family home is number 1. Like you're spending time with your family member who's in the hospital and going over there a lot. And your physical gets dropped down to number 6 because you don't have as much time to work out because you're at the hospital. So I love doing this system because it just puts things into perspective and you don't stress out about things that you're not keeping up with. You realize things happen in season. So if the hospital scenario happened after the person's out, maybe I move my health up to number 1 the next month because I'm like, cool, now I can focus back on me. And I think it's really important to look at that. And, you know, if you're realizing that you are always putting everyone else first and you're never getting your health, you're never working on yourself, you're never, you know, meditating like you want to, that's when we start to get bitter and start to get resentful. And so that's on you because you haven't been prioritizing it.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually is exactly what I was going to say. What I love about this system, number 1, it's simple, but number 2, it's an opportunity to do a self-check every 30 days and actually look at these 6 areas of life and ask myself, okay, but for real, how have I been feeling in my well-being? How have I been feeling in my relationships? And what would make it even better? And actually taking the time to stop and put things into practice that over time, I love how you gave that example, over time, year after year, month after month, that's where you'll see either the positive or the negative implications of doing those monthly daily rituals or not doing them.
Yeah.
Such a good opportunity.
It's tangible stuff too, right? If you make a goal for each thing, you are doing something tangible that you can look at. And then at the end of the month, like I'm looking back and I did pretty good on the alcohol thing, not as good on the workout. So I get to reprioritize. So I'm looking at November. Okay, what's coming up? I don't have any speaking engagements after the 4th of November. So, okay, I can actually maybe get more consistent on my physical if I want to do that. Or I have some time to be at home so I can work on these projects I've been working on for work. So maybe it's going to be financial. I need to step back, look at how did I do and decide if I want to keep that goal or tweak it. Maybe it was too hard. So I need to like bring it down a little bit, or maybe it was too easy, or maybe it was really good and I leave it. A lot of times my goals are the same every single month. Like they're just for my social. A lot of times I just have meet one new person, like have a coffee date a month. And so if I just do that, I'm getting out there and meeting somebody new. And when I was in network marketing, I did one new coffee date a week. And that was the same for like a year. I just always met a new person every single week, never changed that goal. It might change the order of what priority it was, but the goal was always the same. And that's fine. And so I think looking back at the month, see how you did, reevaluating, know what's coming up ahead of time. So like the holidays are coming, things might shift. Your family might move up or down with the holidays. Your physical and health might move up or down because of the holidays. So you get to look back at how you did, and then you get to reprioritize for the next month. And then it just comes down to weekly and daily priorities. And I really think, when it comes to business, is looking at what are the 3 needle movers you can do every single day. If you only got these things done by the end of the day, what would they be? And I remember really struggling with that with my coach too. He was like, okay, well, what are the 3 things? And I'm like, my to-do list has 27 things. And it never did. Like every time I cross something off, something new would be like, it never gets shorter. I don't know. Like this list just keeps turning into like envelopes and papers all over. And I'm just like, but I didn't feel like anything was actually moving in my business. And so looking at what are the needle movers? Because we can get so easily distracted by just like cleaning our inbox, but is that a money-making activity, or is that going to move you forward? There's so many things that we do like that can be distracting and that can be time consuming, and yet they're not helping us move forward. So if your priority is, I need to get 5 new clients. Okay, what do I need to do? I need to get on Instagram stories, or I need to email my list, or I need to do that. So when you're looking at what else do I need to do on my list, go to the grocery store and pick up laundry detergent. Well, maybe someone else could do that. And I always say you do it, delegate it, or delete it. So you either are going to cross that thing off the list, do it, or you're going to give it to someone else, or it just doesn't get done while you get your other priorities done. And sometimes we, as women too, we just have to go, some stuff just doesn't get done. Like we were just talking before, like your nails and hair and stuff. And we like, sometimes, guess what? My nails just aren't going to get done. They're going to look janky. I'm going to go to an event and hopefully people don't look at my nails, but I just didn't have time because I had other things to do. Yeah. And so we have to give ourselves grace too on just being able to say no. And I think prioritizing helps that. And especially for the perfectionistic type, to just be able to go, well, if you're on the path to your goals, it's going to be way easier to say no and not worry about some of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, this is so, so good. So when you then look at your week and then your day, do you make sure that these priorities for the month actually make it in your calendar? Because for me, otherwise it's like very slim chance that these are actually happening.
Yeah. So I like to use, like, I'm using a passion planner, and I kind of scribble some stuff out to make it work how I want to work. So I literally write at the bottom, I think it has right in here in front of me, actually. It has like some space at the bottom. It says like work projects and personal projects. And I just cross that out, and I just put my priorities 1 through 6, and then write my goals on the main month. And then I literally will look at anything there that I can put on the calendar, like schedule in immediately. I'll put it on the calendar. And then if I can't, so we call these like time scheduled activities. Like you and I decided to meet at a certain time to talk, but some things don't have a time attached to them, right? Like maybe you need to get something done, but there's not a deadline because it's our own business. So we either have to create our own deadlines or set aside a time to do it. So I will look at my planner as well on Sunday, right before the week begins. I flip back to my month and go, okay, remind myself, what did I say I wanted to do, and try to hold myself accountable. And then look over my schedule to see where I have time to maybe fit some of those things in. Some of the things are only like once, this month I had call my mom. So I did that, and I was like, cool, check off the list. It was a priority, but I wanted to make sure I did it. And then it was done. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I also wrote a goal to email my brother back, which I haven't done. So I have 3 days left.
Time's a ticking.
Yes. But I do try to refer back, and that's great. That's just a big reminder too. We tend to just set these New Year's resolutions, and we don't refer back to them, but that's so big for a full year. We have to break it down to just smaller things. Mm-hmm. So just referring back and then putting it in your calendar, making sure you're blocking time, or you just know that it's in the back of your mind. Some things I don't write down on the calendar, but it's in the back of my mind. Like, I need to get that done. Like, this is the thing. Okay, these are the 3 things that need to get done today. They're not attached to a time. Like, I need to send an email, I need to record a podcast, and I need to do an Instagram story. I got to get all those done, but I'm not like, okay, podcast at 2:00, Instagram story. Sometimes I'm just more free that way, because I think it's important to do what works best for you. And for me, I don't necessarily work best on like a time schedule.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's like the reason to be an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah. I was like, hence why I'm completely unemployable.
Someone taught me this last year. I'll share it just in case this helps and works for anyone else. But so there were always those tasks that would just be on a list, an arbitrary list in my planner, the one that gets added to every time I check off one item. And instead, I'll put these things, like I use a Google Calendar, I'll put them in my calendar the day that I want to accomplish, record 2 podcast intros, whatever it might be. And when I finish that thing, I actually get to delete it from my calendar. So my goal at the end of the day is actually to have a completely clear slate, which I don't know if it's because it creates like a game in my mind, or I just, like, my OCD tendencies love to see just a clean slate at the end of the day. Obviously, some things do get bumped and get moved to another day if it's just not going to happen. But somehow that has made it like way more fun for me to accomplish, like actually set something in my calendar and complete it, because I get to delete it afterward.
I love it. I actually downloaded an app recently. It's just literally called To Do. I think it's like a to-do list. Oh no, it's called Things. It's called Things, but it's just literally to-do list. And so I have stuff like, I just love checking it off because it deletes, it like goes away. So I love, like, I don't know, if you're visual, you got to do stuff like that just to go, cool, I did it. And even I'll have like Instagram posts just to remind myself to post every day. And I've been so bad at it lately. So I'm like excited when I just get to actually check it off the list. And it just, I think it helps. So whatever helps you get through those daily tasks, and you add your priorities of the day, but then, there's those little things that still have to get done. Maybe not priority, but they're important.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, obviously we could turn an entire episode into the topic of priorities. That's just one of the foundations of the happiness diet and what you've put together. So if you were to pick one of the other topics or sections that the course focuses on that you think is the most impactful, what would it be?
So, man, there's like 2, I'd say. One of them we've talked about at Fitposium too is about a social media cleanse. And so, like, just in the diet theme, I figured we could call it a cleanse, but I think so much of our time is not, I know we all know we're distracted by social media, but a big thing is like who we follow. And I found this happened back when I was, gaining the weight. I started to get really triggered by people who were still working out really hard. And they were like, no excuses, get it done. And I knew for me that I needed to rest. And so seeing that made me feel like, maybe they're right. Maybe I need to go to the gym. And like I was fighting myself going, no, you need to not go to the gym. Like, this is not your race to run. And so I feel like sometimes, especially when we're new entrepreneurs, we look at those people way ahead of us and we have this comparison, and suddenly we're feeling bad about ourselves, or maybe just a friend, like a peer who seemed to be starting around the same time and they seem to be crushing it. And I still deal with this, where I'm scrolling and I'm going, I don't feel good about myself seeing this. And so I really tell people to, if you're first, so I say first start with the purge, like just go in your following list and just immediately, if you have an instant thought, like negative thought about this person, just unfollow. And I think what happens is we feel bad. Like we're like, well, they're going to be upset. It just unfollow. Like, you don't have to explain. You don't have to DM them and be like, hey, I'm unfollowing you. You just do it. Like, it doesn't matter if they reach out and ask you. You can just be like, oh, I don't know. So weird. Accidents happen. I mean, and then you could then you can mute them or something. And then when people, like, when you're going through your feed, if your first reaction is negative, or it makes you feel bad about yourself, or you want to like talk shit on them because you're like, oh, look at what they're doing. Like, you've all been that way too. Like, if you're talking smack about something, just stop following them. Like, why are you doing that? And I just say, like, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Also, just see how much time you're spending. And how do you feel? Like, how do you feel when you're interacting? I like to follow people who inspire me. And there's people literally who I used to be jealous of, and now I'm inspired by them. And like, depending on my mood, maybe depending on the time of the month, I don't know. But I think that sometimes we beat ourselves up and we're like, man, she's crushing it and I'm not. And then other times we're like, wow, she's crushing it. If she can, so can I. So it can go both ways. And sometimes you just have to step away for a little bit. And so I think that we are more in control of our own moods and our own experience than we give ourselves credit for. I hear so often people go, well, social media, it makes us feel bad about our bodies, or it makes us feel bad about this or that. And I'm like, well, you actually choose everything you see. So if that's your experience, you can change that. And where this really hit me was I got to do a takeover on another feed. It was actually for this company called Outsite, and it's a lot of travel bloggers. And I was scrolling through the feed, and it was like no bodies. It was all travel pictures and boats. And I was like, wow, this is so different than my feed. And I realized what a different experience it was. It was not the usual stuff I looked at. And then my boyfriend, I said, let me see your Explore tab. And your Explore tab really shows, what you look at the most. And his was like food and surfing. And I'm like, also, the stuff you look at is not the stuff I look at. So when we're complaining that social media is doing something to us, we are actually choosing to follow that, and we can unfollow that. And so I really, really encourage people to take control over that, because we can't blame our moods on something we're choosing to do. We're on the platform. We get to choose how that affects us and who we're following and who we're looking at. And if you just want to unfollow everyone and follow puppies, by all means do it. Nobody is making you follow your friends. Nobody is making you follow that bikini model. Nobody is making you follow, a big entrepreneur who's telling you to hustle. Like, you don't have to do any of that. So I think that's a big one.
So good. And you're right. I think that the tendency is to think about, what will that other person think if I unfollow. Now there is a mute feature where if it's just not healthy for you right now to be following that person who really probably inspires you in some way, but brings up feelings you don't want to experience, you can just hit mute on Instagram or unfollow on Facebook and just not see their content for the moment. And that's the most loving thing you can do for yourself or for them. So since I know you have like a very awesome sense of humor, I would love to know, like, what are the top 1 or 2 accounts that you go to for just pure like entertainment, humor, fun? Like, what are your favorites and maybe your guilty pleasures to follow?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do have guilty pleasures. So if you follow my Instagram account, The Best Life Podcast, we just post on our stories like just memes that are ridiculous. And Jill loves it too, because it's so outside of her personal brand. Like, she gets this guilty pleasure of being able to put that stuff up because she couldn't put it on her own page. And it's fun, but I get a lot of those. I shouldn't share my sources, I feel like, but there's this DJ named DJ Shoney. He's in San Diego, and he just puts up the most random stuff that I literally die. And some of it I can't even post on ours. Like, it's too dark. But I follow his stuff. And then there's a couple of accounts. I think one is called Your Meme Bro, and another one called Middle Class Fancy. And it's literally just like it's middle class fancy. It's like jokes about going to Chili's, and it feels like how I grew up, like going out on dates, but it's Chili's. And I was like, yeah, that's my life, like. So those are a couple of my accounts that I like to follow. And then I'm really obsessed with, this is actually so funny, puppies, especially. Like I'll tell you what my Explore tab has. I was so embarrassed when I showed my boyfriend. It was rings, because not because I was trying to get married, but I was actually looking for a ring for myself, because I wanted to like buy a ring for myself as a reminder to commit to me and my goals. Puppies. And then the third one, which I'm sure people would not know this, it's a lot of plastic surgery before and afters. I'm so obsessed with before and afters, like Botox, lips, plastic surgery. So I have this weird thing with looking at that stuff.
I never thought about just what a person's Explore page on Instagram reveals about them. That's going to now become a question I should ask every guest. That would just probably reveal more about a person than any other person.
You should ask whoever your partners are, but like, let me see. And usually there's just 3 things. It's interesting. It starts to just show 3 things. And if I start to change, so all of my puppies were golden doodles for a while. And then I clicked on some Australian Shepherd. And now suddenly all my puppies are Australian Shepherds. But the algorithms are fascinating, because they just keep feeding you all the same stuff. So I have so many plastic surgery before and afters, dogs, and rings. So
wow. Okay, I'm going to be fascinated. I would bet a big theme on mine is little kids hip hop dancing.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I will go down all the rabbit holes. So I'll check, and I'll, this is something else you can tag us in, take a screenshot of your Explore page and tell us what it has revealed about your deepest, darkest desires. And if you don't want to share, then maybe then you can just keep that to yourself. But I think that's fascinating. Okay, so I could honestly talk to you all day long. This has been so much fun. And I want to make sure that we leave people knowing where to find you, where to find out more about the Happiness Diet, the podcast, So do you want to give us the rundown? If someone wanted to cyberstalk you, where should they start?
Well, start with Instagram, DannyJ.com, and it's spelled like a boy, DANNY, and then spell out .com, DOTCOM. My last name's Johnson, so it's pretty impossible to get anything with that. So starting there, I have a podcast. It's called the Best Life Podcast. It's also linked in my bio on Instagram. The Happiness Diet is a paid program, but if you want to just get like a piece of it for free, you can actually go to DannyJ.com/podcast. And I have a free priorities webinar where I literally just kind of talk about what I did today, but it's an hour, maybe actually an hour and a half, just going in deep and like breaking it down in literally like simple terms one by one. So you can get that free webinar. And then if you want the Happiness Diet, you can still go there, thehappinessdiet.com. So I think that's all the things. Oh, and it's Danny, like when you go to DannyJ.com/podcast, you actually this time put the dot and then .com.
And I'll link it all. I'll get all the actual links from you so we have it all linked correctly in the show notes, of course. And like you already know, this show really exists to help more women get out of their own way, start to put their ideas into action, and make the impact that they know they're meant to make. So if you were to leave one message, like you had just one final message you could leave for women coming up behind you who have a burning desire to share something, create something on their heart, and you just want to share a message that's going to help them take that next step in their own journey, what would you say?
I think that my one message would be that you do have the power to rewrite your story. So I find so many women in that position who are just, they have a little bit of fear for whatever reason. They're not good enough, or they're not big enough yet, or their message isn't that important. Like we diminish our value, but you have the chance to rewrite that and look at it in another way. Like to say, this actually is important and I am the one to say it. And, you know, if I don't, then who else will? Like how I jumped on that video, like who else is going to do it if you're not? And so I think it's just knowing that you have so much within your power and so much more than you give yourself credit for. And you are able to turn that around. I mean, within an instant, you can just shift your mindset really overnight. So even if you feel like I've waited so long, or it's too late, like nothing's too late and you can change things overnight.
So good. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out today.
Yes, you're so welcome. I appreciate it. And I can't wait to see all the other powerhouse women.